Welcome into Other People's Shoes, the podcast where listeners get to step into the lives of others and see the world through their shoes. Your host, Neil Matthews, is a seasoned interviewer who has a natural talent for empathizing with his guests and drawing out their unique perspectives. Through a combination of storytelling and insightful questioning, Other People's Shoes explores the lives of a diverse range of guests, from everyday people to celebrities and thought leaders. With a warm and welcoming style, Neil creates a safe and supportive space for his guests to share their stories, while also challenging listeners to broaden their perspective and think more deeply about the world around them. So tune in to Other People's Shoes with Neil Matthews and get ready to step into other people's shoes.
Hey, come take a walk with me, not like you used to do. Do something different and put yourself in other people's shoes. Open up your mind and open up your eyes and change your direction, change your perspective.
Welcome into Other People's Shoes. As you know, I am your host, Neil Matthews. Thank you so much for hitting play today. Really excited that you've chosen to do so. And I know you will not be disappointed by our guest today. I don't know about anybody else. Sometimes I find myself binge watching a show. Now hear me on this. There is a show still circling, still in the queue, if you will. I think they're not even HBO Max anymore. I think they're just Max. They dropped the HBO, now they're just Max. So Max, if you know what I'm talking about, they've been re-streaming this show that I have enjoyed for years. And my wife came home the other night and she said, what are you doing? You've seen this all the way through at least 3 times. I've seen this show all the way through 3 times. The show is The Mentalist. Big fan. Simon Baker is the key figure in that show. He plays a character by the name of Patrick Jane. Now, what does that have to do with our guest today? Well, I'm going to set the table for you right now. Patrick Jane, his character is kind of a mentalist. He manipulates people. He has some psychic, if you will, which is phooey. He actually makes fun of psychics because he thinks they're phooey, and I might be in the same thread. There's a line in one of the seasons, in one of the shows, in one of the episodes, where he says, yeah, I am the smartest man in the room. I do know it all. Now, for some of us, when we hear I'm a know-it-all, what does that invoke in us? Well, luckily for us, we have traveled all the way out to the great Show Me State in Missouri. Now, if you're not familiar with where Missouri is on the map, that's okay. It's actually pronounced Missouri, outside of Missouri, if you're wondering, and it's kind of right smack dab in the middle. So you got Iowa, you got Arkansas. It's in that area. So again, if you're still stuck, if you're still wondering where we are, maybe go look at a map or go back to 5th grade. Whichever it may be, welcome in my new friend, Sarah. Sarah, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Neil. And I'm going to do my know-it-all for you right now about Missouri. You can pronounce it either way, and it's actually correct. So the Native Americans pronounced it Missouri, and the French settlers pronounced it Missouri. Either way is okay, but generally speaking, if you live on the western half of the state, it's Missouri. The eastern half of the state's Missouri, and that's where I'm at, in southeast Missouri.
Well, so my mom was born in Springfield, Missouri.
Does she say Missouri?
She does. To this day. And so I was in school, again, going back to that 5th grade kind of monologue as I was doing there. We're memorizing the states and where they are and all this stuff because I had a really cool teacher that taught us that stuff. So it comes to Missouri. And so I stand up proudly and I say, you know, as I'm rattling off the states, I say Missouri. And I got marked down. Truly, I missed, there's 50 states. I got 49 correct.
Oh.
Mispronounced Missouri. And
30 years later, you're exonerated from that.
I feel like I need to have you find him, my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Henderson, wherever you are. I don't know where he's probably passed now. Who knows? I don't know. First started, I wanted everybody from 50 states. That was the goal. Almost 5 years in, and we have like 9 states left. I actually went and looked and did the research, put the research department on that, and we are down to 9 states. So this season, I wasn't sure we were going to get to Missouri. We've gotten close. We've gotten real close to Kansas and Kentucky. We've gotten real close. Like somebody could drive 5 minutes and they're in Missouri. Now we still need, so if you can help us, we still need Iowa. We still need Minnesota. We still need Wisconsin. I like to say it like that. And somehow we're going to have to get New Hampshire. I feel like it's going to be the 11th hour and we're going to get New Hampshire. Now we've had Vermont and Maine even, so that's even more fun. No, as of yet, no New Hampshire. We've even had Rhode Island.
I could help you out with some of those.
And Alaska. How could I forget Alaska? I mean, it's gigantic.
I can help you out.
Somebody came to me tomorrow and said, okay, hey, it's time, which nobody has. I feel like I would have to say, no, hold on a second. We need like 4 more states and then we can be done. We have a lot from Texas, a lot from Oregon, and I know this is going to shock some. We have a ton from North Carolina and a lot from Oregon, I guess. I got to say my home state, Oregon. On to you, Sarah. I'm excited. You have appeared on over 70 podcast episodes. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's about right, I think.
And I laughed because I think some young podcasters who are starting out haven't even done 70 shows themselves as a host. Right. It's quite impressive that you've done that many as a guest. So you're seasoned, you're ready, and here we go. And it'll be like nothing you've ever experienced, I bet, in being on with us today. So well, we'll see about that in the afterwards. Love to lead off every show with this question. Sarah, what style of shoe do you love to wear?
I work from home, so I'm in cozy clothes all day, and I exercise about once an hour, get my blood flowing. So I wear Brooks tennis shoes. They're good for arch support because I have high arches.
So I just purchased my very first pair of Brooks shoes. I don't know if you know this or not, but I have upwards of 80 pairs of shoes. So for every show you've been on, I probably have a pair of shoes that represent this show that you've been on. Okay, silly moment there. I just bought my first pair and somebody was giving me a bad time about it. They said, wow, you finally broke down. I said, it was a good buy. So I'm into that. Like if it's a good buy on shoes, I'm going to do it. But they're the Ghosts 15, I think. So I don't know if that helps with you, what you're doing. They are very comfy. I'm not in love with the color, but they are very comfortable.
I don't really care about that. I am more practical minded. I have to consult my teenage daughter for style tips.
We have one of those too. She's 16 now, and now she's driving. And we were at Olive Garden the other night for her birthday back on June 28th. It is a surreal moment, I will tell you as a parent, when you see your kid driving away for the first time by themselves.
Oh, yeah. This one is my baby. So I have 2 boys older than her. When she starts driving, it'll be really weird not to have to be a taxi driver for a kid anymore.
You could almost do Uber nowadays because you probably get summoned like an Uber driver, right? Like, Mom, where are you at?
Pretty much, yeah.
Well, Sarah, help us with this because we've been walking through this season as we start to wind down in this season that we're in. Very sad to see it go. Some people are always excited about what's next. And so I don't want to tip off what's next because we're still in what's now. And that's this mask idea. Now, for you, that did kind of resonate on some levels for you. How so? And what masks do you feel like you wore or maybe did wear or are wearing or all the above?
So years ago, I wrote a blog post about a know-it-all mask. I feel like until I was in my mid-30s, I pretty well wore that mask. And I think there's a few reasons for it. One reason is I was a gifted student. I wasn't really even challenged in school until I got to college. I was a straight A student. I mean, I just was naturally smart. This is how God made me. Also, another aspect of this is I've taken spiritual gift tests over the years since high school. About every 10 years, I've taken the test and my gifts are consistent. My gifts are faith, knowledge, and wisdom. Knowledge and wisdom are they're just strong areas in me. I think part of it was just my natural gifting. Many of us can use our natural giftings for ill rather than for good. I am INFJ on the Myers-Briggs scale. And so the J stands for judge. And so I think one of my characteristic sins is judging. And again, I just have to be careful with that because it is how I'm naturally designed. When I use it in a way to lord my knowledge over other people, then it becomes destructive. Rather than being insightful or prudent with it, it can be a challenge for me to not criticize other people. I talked about this in my first traditionally published book, Transforming Your Thought Life. It's about 17 different thought life areas that are problems for us. And I just openly admitted in the chapter, Thoughts That Criticize Others, I said, this is my struggle area. This is just where I struggle. And so I think it's all of that is connected. And then on top of that, I feel like I grew up in a family that really, the way that they took pride in themselves is through knowledge. It was almost weaponized, I think, in our family. So it was like a toxic situation that, again, I didn't really recognize until I started meeting other friends where that wasn't the family dynamic. Because for me, as a child, as a teenager, I didn't really experience things in any different way. I went to other families and visited with them and saw the way that they acted together and saw this not in those families. It started giving me pause about, why do we do this? Why do we do these comeuppance contests with each other about how much we know? And I just started to see so much lack of health for all of these reasons combined. I think that the way that I decided to deal with it is to really pursue humility. That's the virtue that we can pursue when we're wearing this mask of know-it-allism. Even in the church, I think that was like the worst manifestation that I've experienced myself. Also, among other Christians who wear that mask, it's just such an abuse of a gift that God has given us. And so I think if we really focus on humility, then we can overcome that. And I just remember starting in college, I did a lot of meditating on the book of Philippians. And this is when Paul is writing about how Jesus is the king of the world, but humbled himself to become human and serve while he was here on earth. Now he's exalted to the highest throne in heaven. And I just really thought about that a lot. And I thought, if I call myself a Christian, I really need to act more like Jesus did. And I think in this particular area is where I need to focus the most. I think it will counterbalance all of those natural wirings, but also kind of my sinful nature, which is bent in a certain direction. It took years of practice and making lots of mistakes to start overcoming that. One way that's really embarrassing, I don't know if I've ever even talked about this before, I found myself in conversations with people actually making declarative statements that couldn't even really back up. And I think it was just to impress people. During a conversation, I was afraid that someone would call me out on it and say, well, how did you hear that? Or how do you know about that? I don't think I ever got caught or called out. Once I began this kind of humility journey, I realized that that was this carryover from my toxic family dynamics that I had to just realize in conversations. It was okay to say things like, I don't know, or I need to look that up. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's endearing to people when they probably are thinking they don't know either. You go first and say that. It makes everybody more comfortable. These are some things that I've had to learn. It's taken a long time to grow into that. I feel like I will probably be wrestling with that all my life. I can look back to where I was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and see a lot of growth in this area.
I think that's incredible to recognize and to even realize. First, maybe you recognize it, then you realize it, or maybe you realize it, then you recognize it, whichever. The bigger step to me, you said, hey, I got to change this. I got to fix this. Because let's face it, there's a lot of people right now listening, perhaps, that have felt like I'm the dumbest one in the room, not necessarily the smartest one in the room. And we don't have a lot of value to bring to a conversation. We don't have a lot of interesting points, maybe a take or something. Or in the sports world, they call it a hot take. Is you had to kind of really self-evaluate and say, I don't want to continue to live this way. Everybody hates the what if game. What if you had not made those changes in that course correction? What do you think life would look like?
Well, I used to work with someone who had this problem probably 10 times greater than I did, even at the peak of my issue. I saw how blind this person was to how off-putting that behavior was. This was at a school where I worked, and the students and other faculty would talk about this person behind their back, just how selfish and difficult this person was to deal with. And then I also saw, too, how incredibly lonely this person was, incredibly isolated, acting kind of out of desperation, was because of the very problem to which they were blind. So it was this horrible, vicious cycle that this person kind of dug their own grave of just isolating themselves from everyone with this horrific level of know-it-allism. I know it was based on insecurity. insecurity was based on insecurity in my own life too. I think there's a real value in when we're dealing with difficult people to look at the negative example and learn from that. Not so much in, well, I'm better than that person, but more like, what can I learn? What can I learn not to do from this example? And that is the path that I took with that person. It was a very, very challenging work experience. Even now, years later, I still think of that person from time to time, and I just feel pity almost. And I remember opportunities that person was given to see these blind spots. They were confronted by different people and just never even exercised the humility to take constructive criticism. And again, this was in a Christian high school. This was not the secular world. This is in a Christian environment. It was just so incredibly destructive. I just remember having that example, living, breathing example in front of me of someone who had destroyed their life through this. And I thought, I don't want to be like that. I just don't want to be like that. While I felt compassion for them in their situation, I was like, the only person I can change is me. And I also want to be a good example to my children. Even though I grew up in this environment, I don't have to recreate this environment for them to grow up in. I did a fairly decent job of that. They're still learning and growing. I think I definitely did better than what I grew up with. I can say that with confidence.
I think that's the whole goal as a parent, is the idea that we want to leave our kids kind of better than we were. At least that's my goal as a parent. I know there's many times I've caught myself doing things my parents did, and I immediately like, oh, stop that. Especially if it was something bad maybe that I picked up from them. It's so powerful to admit and share that, hey, that is something that I did wear for a long time. For the ladies and maybe even the men, I know you're a woman, so you can maybe speak to that perspective a little bit more. Especially, I would imagine in some circles, ladies feel like their voice isn't as elevated or isn't as amplified. And so they feel like they have to be what you're describing as this know-it-all. Like, I have to bring value, again, going back to what I was saying, bringing back value to that conversation. What would you say to those ladies that maybe are struggling in that regard?
There's a verse that Peter wrote, and he talks about the beauty of quiet and gentle spirit. I don't really struggle with that verse because that's kind of my natural temperament, to be gentle. But I know that some of my friends who have stronger personalities than I do, maybe are even like alpha females, really wrestle with that. I think, like you just said, they feel like they have to assert themselves in such a way to prove that they can go toe to toe with male leaders, people at work, that kind of thing. But I think it's more of a heart position than necessarily prescriptive for behavior. I think that if we spend time alone with God, and we think about how he's created us to be. Really, I think the very best place, even though it's such a controversial portion of the Bible, I think unnecessarily so, is Ephesians 5. And go back to what Paul says, and he says, husbands, give yourselves up for your wives like Christ did for the church. That's an enormous act of humility. Then it also tells us wives that we must respect our husbands. And even if you're not married, it still applies in terms of how we treat each other, to treat each other with love and respect, using Jesus as our example. If we look at a heart position of being quiet, as in slow to speak, meaning listening more than talking, which is desperately needed in this culture, and then gentle, meaning kind and putting other people first, being selfless. These are heart attitudes we can put on whether we are more like Martha or Mary as women. And even as men, if you are more type A or a type B kind of person, the way that we interact with each other and we get right with God and what that looks like, it really is this balm that soothes almost every area in our relationships. And one area for me that this has been really helpful in, and I've talked to a lot of fellow Gen Xers about this. Did your parents apologize for what they did wrong? And most Gen Xers say, oh no, they did not. And I think this is characteristic among many baby boomers. It was just not something in their generation that was emphasized. It was, we don't talk about that stuff. We just get up and tomorrow's a new day. We were craving them to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I yelled at you. I'm sorry I came down too hard on you. I shouldn't have grounded you for that stupid thing. I made a mistake. I decided, again, in terms of removing my mask, as a parent, when my kids were young, I decided that if I messed up, I was going to go tell them that I messed up. And I didn't want them to have this idea that their mom was this invincible controller up on some kind of pedestal, not able to be approached. And I feel like that has really paid off in terms of the emotional intelligence that my 3 teenagers exhibit, because they realize that adults are flawed people. I think they've made their transition from childhood to adulthood easier because they had it modeled that they didn't have to be this perfect person who made all these perfect decisions all the time and never apologized for doing anything wrong. And so that was another key component of like working this whole thing out in a practical way in my relationships, is to be humble enough to apologize. And do it first. Don't wait for somebody to come to me and confront me with what I did wrong. Go to them and say, I was off base. It's just earned so much trust, I think, between me and my kids. And it was the right move to make, even though it was not fun. It's not enjoyable to humble yourself. In terms of the dividends it pays in relationships, it's totally worth it.
I love that. The dividends that it pays. So much of our society nowadays, I feel like, is stuck in this ROI. Like, what's the return on my investment? That's what an ROI is, if someone doesn't know that expression. If you don't show up, if you don't really allow your voice to be heard, if you allow yourself to somehow be muted or to be, less than, can it really create bitter roots in your heart, do you feel like?
I think that depends on someone's personality. I know some people who are meek and they don't necessarily feel the urgency to have their voices heard. I think all of us have needs that need to be met. All of us have voids in our life that are only able to be filled really with connections with other people. And of course, our relationship with God. One of my friends in Bible study years ago, it told me that sometimes people are Jesus with skin on to us. As we humble ourselves with the goal of connecting more deeply with others and also growing in our relationship with Christ, that's how we really change the world. Last night, I started reading Tim Keller's book, Forgive, talking about, and I'm only, 50 pages in, so I don't have it fully developed yet in my head. He's talking about how our entire culture is not in favor of forgiveness. The biblical model for forgiveness is based on community, on fostering community. Require a lot of humility and self-sacrifice to absorb the pain that someone puts on us when they sin against us. And then we have to forgive them for that offense. It's intended to keep those relational doors open. The more that we can work on these deep heart issues, the more that people, no matter how they're wired, no matter what personality they have, are going to be drawn to us because we are cultivating a community of trust. And I think that's what everyone is looking for. Everyone is looking for a place to be safe and a place to be soothed and a place where they know they can be themselves and still be loved. And I think that's what we can offer the world as Christians. And it's very much countercultural. I think of you in Oregon, which is pretty much a whole different culture than where I am in Southeast Missouri. But that principle is true in both places because it's the way God set the whole world up to work. It's because it's his idea, and his ideas are always the best ones.
That's what we were kind of talking about at the beginning, that I did want somebody from every state. Again, I grew up a Marine kid, and so I was inundated from a young age of all of these cultures, all of this diversity, all of these people from all walks of life that are coming to really gather this epicenter, aka the Marine Corps, of people just influxing my little elementary school that I was in. People from Kentucky. We had people from, I remember having a friend from Great Britain. His mom was British, and somehow she had met her husband and he was a Marine. His name was Ryan. And I remember just thinking as a kid, like, well, I didn't grow up that way, and wanting to know more about why why they grew up that way. And little did I know I was learning and experiencing things that most people don't get that opportunity. I didn't know how special I was in that moment. What I want to ask you about, it sounds like you have quite a bit of a Bible knowledge to you. Not that you lord that over folks, or maybe that's been in the past, but now you've worked through that. But there's this part that I'm really struggling with that kind of leads into something that may be on the horizon, we'll say. But there's this moment where David shows up to fight Goliath, and he doesn't know he's going to fight him yet. He's just visiting his brothers. It's 1 Samuel 17, I think right around verse 32, 33, somewhere in there. But he's talking about who's going to go and fight this guy? Who is going to have the knowledge and the expertise to fight Goliath? Because nobody wants to. And David's kind of ticked off because he's defying God. And he's like, who's going to go fight that man? And they're like, well, nobody really. We're just going to kind of cower. David's like, listen, I'll go fight him. Like, I'm going to go do it. And there's this scene I imagine in my mind, the Bible kind of depicts it a little bit, where he's trying to try on the armor with Saul's armor, and he's failing. He's like realizing that's not who I am. You're trying to put me into something I'm not. That's not a mask I'm going to wear, Saul. Sorry, King Saul, love you, but no, I'm not going to do that. And Saul makes this comment. He says, you were only this. What about you in that moment? Is this maybe one of those moments for you where maybe somebody would say, listen, Sarah, you were only this smart. You were only this. You were only that. And what if you continued to wear that specific title or that mask or this idea again, you were only going to be this person? How does that make you feel?
I have been a victim of abuse my whole life. Until last year, a victim of emotional abuse for 45 years. And so as I'm listening to you say that, that's what a victim of abuse feels like. Never going to be more than this, or you're only this, or you can't. And so that's what that makes me feel. And I think that year and a half that I've worked on grieving, but also now I'm more in a healing mode than a grieving mode. They go together. I'm just realizing David is a perfect example of this. His strength in that moment came from so much time in the wilderness, just him and the Lord and the animals that he was taking care of. And that's when the Spirit of the Lord was with him. I read a wonderful book called I Am David by Jimmy Evans, and he talks about how David was probably rejected by his family, and that's why when Samuel came to anoint him, that his dad didn't even mention him. It was like an afterthought. So David had a father wound, probably a mother wound. The Lord was healing him in that time that he spent intentionally seeking God in the wilderness, and that is why David went out on this battlefield in front of the entire Hebrew army and just used the stone and the slingshot with which he was familiar. And that was enough. He was comfortable in his own skin, but that did not happen in the span of 30 minutes. That happened in years and years of David taking his needs and his hurts and his deficiencies to God, broken family relationships, and perhaps even the abuse that he had experienced. His brothers, in that account that you just mentioned, they were just mean-spirited toward him. They were not supportive of him. And so who even knows what went on in that house? I mean, God did, of course. For victims of abuse like myself, we can draw a lot of strength from that story, that if we take our brokenness and the hurts that other people inflicted upon us without cause, if we take those to the Lord and let him heal us, he will strengthen us and he'll be able to win battles that we were going to fight. The Lord is going to give us the victory, even though he's the one who directed that stone right to the exact right place to take Goliath down. David got the victory for it. And it's because David said, the Lord did this. That moment, paradigm shifting moment for David. He was a shepherd boy, forgotten, disdained by his family before that point. And then after that, a man of greatness. It can be that powerful if we are willing to spend that time one-on-one with the Lord and really seek him and seek the truth. You talked about my Bible knowledge in 2003. I mean, I had grown up Christian. I went to Christian school. I went to Christian college. I had never read through the whole Bible. And so in 2003, I bought a one-year Bible. So it's just a easy read format. Started it in January 1st, and by March, God was showing me how many lies I was believing. Coming at the Bible and saying, I believe that this is true. This is the truth with a capital T. And so what I'm listening to in my head does not match what that says. It doesn't even match up. I have to reorient my life around the truth. I read the 1 Year Bible for 18 years in a row. It's just part of me now. I can just pull these things out because I've read them so many times. It literally changed me. It healed me. It took me out of my codependency, which is part of being a victim of abuse for most of us, I think. It helped me set boundaries. It helped me see my self-worth, my value in Christ that cannot be changed by anything anyone else says. It made my faith rock solid. So that is what changed everything for me, and it can change everything for anyone. You have to invest the time in reading God's word because you discover who he is, and then you discover who you really are by engaging with the real truth.
See, and again, I think that's a powerful thing to think about. Even in that moment, I feel like there were so many people in that moment with David and Goliath that were wearing a mask of shame of, well, I don't want to go do it. Well, who's going to go do it? Well, not me. Don't pick me. Don't look this way as they're walking down maybe the battle line of, okay, what about you, JoJo? Nope. I'm not feeling good today. Don't really have my A game. What about you, so-and-so? Nope. Don't feel like that way as well. I got this thing I'm dealing with. But David's like, no, I'm going to be the one to step forward. I'm going to be the one to step up. And to me, Sarah, I think what you're saying is very courageous, stepping out of that shadow to say, listen, ladies, life doesn't have to be this way any longer. I don't have to be that victim. I don't even have to wear the mask of being a victim. I don't even have to do that anymore. Hear me on this. I'm not that insensitive. I don't think that's an easy mask to just rip off. I don't think it's just like, taking off a garment or a coat or, of some sort. Okay, I'm done. I'm free of that. Now let's go and live our life. That's not what I'm hearing you say, that it's been quite the process to do it. So I ask this, how does one stay consistent and not quit, not only on yourself, but on your kids as well?
2003, I started doing that. In 2006 and 2007, I read the book Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. I have recommended that over 100 times. If you haven't read that book, go get it. Started setting boundaries in these toxic family situations and got an enormous amount of pushback. But that landed me in therapy. I went to therapy every other week for 5 years. That is what really did change me. So I had God's word first, and then I was connecting with small groups at church. That was how I mentioned how I needed to see how other families acted before I started recognizing how toxic my family was. That's what I discovered by being a small group member in my church. What was normal in my experience was not normal among the groups of ladies I was in. And so that started changing my mind. And then by going and meeting with a counselor and unpacking all of this stuff, those three things all came together. So it was one-on-one with God, it was in community with others, and it was with a professional. For the amount of trauma and abuse that I've experienced, there was no other way. It took years. It took 10 years from the time that I started reading the Bible every day to the time I finished 5 years of therapy was 10 years. The only regret I have is that I hadn't started it sooner. It set me free. That's the easiest way to describe it. It set me free from the prison of lies that I was living in. So worth it.
What would you say to that Sarah prior to the metamorphosis that maybe she would love to have heard?
I think I would say to her that God has everything in store for you that you ever wanted and more, but you're going to have to learn a whole different way of looking at the world and interacting with it to step into that blessing. She wouldn't have liked to hear that, but it is the truth. It's the truth. I had to be deprogrammed, honestly. But those three things that I mentioned worked to do that. And so I'm a huge proponent of all of those things. I write about this constantly, speak about it constantly. I have a podcast for adult children of divorce, and I revisit those things all the time. You've got to be in community with other people. You've got to get counseling for these issues. They're too deep or too big to handle on your own, and you've got to deepen your relationship with God. It's what we have to do. So I try to just kind of be like a big sister to others who aren't necessarily as far along as I am on that healing journey or self-awareness journey, I guess is another way to look at it, and just say, you can do it. It's going to be hard. Really hard. It's very hard to reroute a river. That's essentially what you're doing. If you're a true victim, we have a lot of victim mentality in our culture, but I'm talking about an actual true victim of abuse. Then you're going to have to reroute a river. It takes time and an immense amount of energy and probably a significant investment of money. I mean, 5 years of therapy was not cheap. Again, it was worth it. I would do it all over again. I wanted to be set free, and that's what God did. And I'm so thankful. I'm still in a reconstruction process, I guess you could call it. It's not exactly how I want it to be. It will be in time when God decides that it's the right time for that to happen.
Trauma happens. I feel like so many times people have one or two options that they usually do. They usually quit, shut down, isolate, lock themselves away, burn down the house in some respects, like end every relationship they've ever had and become a hermit. Or the flip side of that, they find ways to continue to move forward and use that fuel as rocket fuel to really propel them or catapult them into a different just mindset. And I've seen the great ones do that. They find a way to say, okay, this is not who I am going to be. I don't like this version of me. I'm not waiting for the next iOS update to put this out, but I'm going to really be better than I am now. And I think that's at least what I'm hearing from your standpoint. So I applaud you and your efforts for that. So what message do you think that sends to your kids? Because they've seen this. They've been captive audience during this whole experience with you and everything that you've walked through. What do you really hope that they gained and gathered from you?
That's a powerful question. What I want, my kids and I have been through hell this last 18 months. What I want them to see is that my obedience to what God has told me to do will help them have a faith of their own that is unshakable. They are all people of faith. They go to church without being told. And if you have 3 teenagers that do that, you are a blessed parent. Very blessed. So I am blessed. I also know that sometimes it takes a while when you've grown up in a Christian home to really make your faith your own. So that's what I want for all 3 of my children, that 5 years from now, they'll say, because I watched mom struggle, but still cling to faith and then get rewarded for that. See, we haven't experienced that yet, but I'm trusting that that's what God is going to do. Then they'll say, you know what? He did it for mom and he's going to do it for me. That's my hope.
I go back to that widow woman that Elijah ran into that was running out of oil and was going home to just basically die. Her and her son were basically going to go home and die. And Elijah shows up on the scene and says, hey, can you bake one more loaf of bread for me? Come on. And she's like, well, I really don't have anything left. And I'm going to obey. I'll do it. I don't have anything else. Like this was it. But I almost hear that in your voice telling of that story for me is the idea that I don't know where the blessing's going to come from. I don't know when it's going to show up. It's kind of like an Amazon package nowadays. I think it's going to be here on Thursday, but I'm not positive. Come on, Amazon, step up. You are so confident in the God of gods and the Lord of lords that you're like, I don't know where it's going to come, but I am going to stand firm that you're going to show up. And to me, I think that is a tremendous testimony to have and to even model for your kids. So again, I applaud your efforts for that. Well, Sarah, as we start to wrap up, I want to give you an opportunity right now. Where is the best place and where should people go to connect with you outside of this time together we've had?
Honestly, the best place is my website, which is sarahgeringer.com. I know you'll put that in the show notes of this. Then you can just pick your favorite social media platform to follow me on. I'm on just about all of them. You can get more information about my books, my podcasts, and then the services I offer. If you're a Christian creative, I offer services to Christian creatives. So you can check it all out on my website.
Awesome. We love that a lot. Well, Sarah, I feel like some silliness needs to ensue because we've had some serious stuff. And I always feel like we need some giggles. We need some laughter. Now, you'd mentioned in the green room that you kind of are a diehard Cardinals fan. I think diehard would be a good representation of you, right?
Yeah. Oh, this is gonna hurt, but I'll try to laugh with you. I know where you're going with this.
All
I
right.
think.
Well, I just was wondering, someone that has struggled with being a know-it-all, this is one college that needs some more knowledge there because they're walking a path that I'm not really. Somebody pulled me aside recently and was like, "Did you hear with the Supreme Court ruling affirmative action is now struck down? It's because of North Carolina." I'm like, listen, I like the school and the teams, the athletes, and I love to support them. What they do on an academic level, I can't really be held responsible for.
Yes.
Okay.
I would say you love them.
I do
You're
love. I do. I even have a tattoo. Believe it or not.
Yeah,
of the
you're
North Carolina
totally.
Yeah. Do you have any Cardinals tattoos? Asking for a friend, of course, not me.
You could not pay me to get a tattoo.
Of anything. It doesn't matter.
Of anything.
All right.
I am horrifically afraid of needles, so I don't care what it would be. No tattoos for this.
No tattoos for this one. You're like Kim Kardashian. Would you put a bumper sticker on a Bentley? That she has been quoted as saying that. So I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. She is credited to saying that. So anyway, I have my handy dandy North Carolina cup here. So I'm going to roll since you're still in Missouri, however you want to say it today. And we'll see what happens here. It is our fun thing that we do at the end of the show called Senseless. These 6 random questions that are just supposed to be funny and silly. Sometimes they can get a little serious. I think for the most part, they are funny and silly. So here we go. I'm going to roll on your behalf. All right, you got this. I can't even spin it right. Number 2.
Okay.
There it is. Number 2 is this. 2 things you hope to finish this year.
I'm on this weightlifting journey. I'm not super great at it. I'm working on it. I want to get stronger, have an annual goal of reading 100 books a year, and I'm at like 46 books right now. So I'm on track.
You are on track to read 100 books in a year?
Yeah, I've done this every year since 2019.
Wow.
So I track that on Goodreads. If anybody is a avid reader out there, Goodreads is going to be your best friend. So you can look me up on there.
That's crazy. I don't think I've read 1 book in a year, much less 100.
Well, you would be like an average American then. You are definitely the majority. I am in the tiny minority.
So help me with this. Does reading constitute sitting down, physically reading said book, or can I listen to said book? Does that count?
Yeah, I've written a blog post about how to read 100 books a year. I read them while I'm on my treadmill.
Okay.
So like on my Kindle, I have a Kindle app on my phone. So anytime I'm waiting anywhere, getting my oil changed, go to the vet's office, anything, I can log like 10 minutes of reading. And yeah, of course, audiobooks count. I feel like they take longer because, an audiobook is like 7 or 9 hours long, and it doesn't take that long for me to read a paperback book. I'm a really fast reader. I read about 75 to 100 pages an hour. I live in the world of books, so it makes sense, right? It's like if you're a true North Carolina fan, you eat, breathe, and sleep their sports programs. Like all of them.
It's true. I even like women's field hockey.
That's what I'm trying to say. See?
I think they were the national champions this year. And I'm going out there in November. I can't wait. Like November cannot come fast enough.
That's very cool.
I'm going to spend 3 days out there. It's going to be a whirlwind tour. Yeah, I can't wait. It's going to be fun. We're going to watch a football game, which I know some people are like, what? You're going all that way and not even going to watch a basketball game? I'm crossing my fingers that the scheduling powers that be can make a game, a home game. I've actually been emailing the athletics department. The email has come back unread because I'm trying to figure out if they're going to have a home game on November 10th. And I'm like, even if you can't, can you just open up the gym and like have a practice game, like a pretend game, like an imaginary game, just so I can go in there and watch that said practice imaginary game? It's mildly bad.
I think so.
Sarah, again, I just want to say thank you so much for what you shared. I appreciate you being here today. You are a pro, you're a veteran. I wish you all the great success in all future endeavors. So thank you so much for being here today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, guys and gals, kids and campers alike, that is it. That is all. That is our show today. I don't know about anybody else. I like those know-it-all people in the room because I sheepfully admitting here, shamefully and sheepfully, maybe I'm just on the Ram thing still, North Carolina Ram. I kind of like to be the know-it-all in the room. And I think the reason why, there is one, I always felt like the dumbest one in the room. So I really worked hard on memorizing things as a kid so I could, just give out a fun little fact. Fun fact. Alexa can do that too, by the way, if you're wondering. You just ask her, Alexa, give me a fun fact, and she'll tell you one. She's good about that. But what about you? let's go back to you for a second. Are you struggling with that? Is that your mask? Is that your identity? Is that who you are? Well, it's not who you have to be. Just keep that in mind. But if you are struggling with that, let me know. I'd love to know. OPSpodcast.com is a great place to let me know. You can let us know on the socials, OPS Podcast Show, on our Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And I bet you, I just know this. I don't even have to bet. I know this. I bet if you needed help with that, my new friend Sarah would be able to help you with that. You can reach out to her. Let her know. With all that said, don't forget this. Remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned till next week when we walk in other people's shoes.